Breakout session. Thank you so much.
But I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna zip them up now. Remind me to unzip them when we get ready to get up.
I think we're live. Our mics are on. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. How are you all doing today? It's amazing to see you all, to see a room filled with people interested in the topics that we're going to talk about, as well as the Diversity Forum theme as a whole. My name is Angela Fitzgerald. Well, my real name is Angela Fitzgerald Ward, but my TV name is Angela Fitzgerald, and I'm a host and producer with PBS Wisconsin. I have the honor of supporting 2 shows on that network, Wisconsin Life, and the show we're talking about today, Why Race Matters. And I'm here with our illustrious, well, 2/3 of our illustrious advisory council for the show, because I'll talk more about how it was conceptualized, but in short, I did not want to be the sole Black voice in terms of making decisions about the show. And so Dr. Pate, Ms. Jackie, and Solomon Roller, who is our 3rd advisory member, helped to guide the direction of Why Race Matters. So I will stop talking, give the floor to them to introduce themselves to you.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and welcome to everyone who's here. My name is David Pate. I'm a professor in the School of Human Ecology in the Consumer Science and Human Development and Family Studies Department, and also an affiliate of the School of Social Work and the Institute for Research on Poverty. And I'm very honored to be a part of this advisory group, which has been for 3 years now? About 3 years. And one of my areas of work that I do is race, and I look at primarily race through a qualitative research methodology. But primarily I focus on Black men. That's who I've studied for the last 30 years, and I feel really honored to be able to contribute what I've learned through my analysis of everyday occurrences for Black people to this project as well. And I'll turn over to Ms. Jackie at this point.
Hello, everyone. My name is Miss Jackie. I'm Jacqueline Hunt. I go by Miss Jackie, or everyone's favorite Auntie Jackie. And I am a mental health and substance abuse professional here in Madison, Wisconsin. I also have my own small nonprofit called Foster of Dane County, where our goal is to improve the lives of marginalized families in our community by every means necessary and available. I am also a person with a lot of lived experiences in most of the areas where race tends to perpetuate the experience of people who look like myself. One other thing I'd just like to say is I'm happy to be here, and yeah. Good. All right.
Thank you, Dr. Pate and Ms. Jackie. Just to give a little bit of an introduction to Why Race Matters before we jump right in. Why Race Matters elevates issues of importance affecting Wisconsin's Black communities. It was created by PBS Wisconsin during the height of the Black Lives Matter movement during the summer of 2020, and in response to the then climate ripe for discussion about racial justice and equity. In Why Race Matters, we connect in conversation with everyday people whose work and commitment center on race, identity, and achieving racial equity in our state. We share stories of artists, community organizers, health professionals, and subject experts, and listen to the layered lived experiences of Black people living in Wisconsin. We explore topics simultaneously historic and urgent, like Black mental health, civic engagement, maternal well-being, the school-to-prison pipeline, Black farmers and land ownership, and the list goes on, while offering hope, guidance, and resources to thrive. In our premiere episode, I share my story and why this work remains an important focus for our state. We'd like to share that episode with you now. Wisconsin is often described as the most segregated state in the nation. I didn't know that. I moved here from the DC area in 2014 and didn't know a lot about the Black population in Wisconsin. But since then, I've learned a lot about Wisconsin's Black community, their successes and their challenges. I've had loads of conversations with friends and those working to improve our community. But I still want to learn more. Together, let's discover and explore why race matters in Wisconsin. Before I became a public television host, my journey started in Washington, D.C., and I grew up in Southern Maryland, in a city called Fort Washington. Fort Washington is about 32 minutes south of the nation's capital, where 65% of the population is Black. I was very accustomed to seeing people that looked like me on a regular basis. I very much, I guess, came to see that as like the standard way of being, just like, yeah, you go to the grocery store or the airport or the doctor's office or school and you see people that look like you. Like that was very much a norm for me. The point is, like, I saw me everywhere that I went.
In 2014, I moved to Madison, Wisconsin for a job, moving from a majority Black space to a city that's almost 80% white.
So I was pretty aggressive, at least the first month, of trying to figure out where were the spaces where I could find foods I appreciated, I could find hair products, I could find like some sort of semblance of a social life. And I'd never had to put forth that effort before, like in any other place in which I lived, which was interesting.
Soon after I moved to Madison, the Wisconsin Council on Children and Families launched a multi-year initiative called the Race to Equity Report. The goal was to explore, measure, and analyze the racial disparities in Dane County, Wisconsin.
I'd never lived in a space, at least that I was aware of, maybe that's a privilege I took for granted, where like race was in my face in that way. On the one hand, that felt exciting to be like, okay, they're talking about race, that feels progressive. And then kind of later on, there were other feelings that developed the longer I was here, and the more it felt like race felt more like an academic exercise for people and not like an actual intentional focal area that there was desire to change anything around.
After the death of George Floyd in 2020 and the increased media attention around racial justice, I felt a responsibility to use my connections in public broadcasting to highlight some of these issues in Wisconsin. Certain spaces in Wisconsin are often credited as some of the most livable cities, but for whom exactly? A 2019 report from the Center on Wisconsin Strategy showed that Wisconsin ranks near the bottom nationally on a number of racial disparities, including worst for unemployment, second worst for out-of-school suspension, third worst for voter participation, and fourth worst for infant mortality. The Black experience in Wisconsin needs to be talked about. Our stories need to be heard. My journey here started in 2014, but it's still going. Let's explore and recognize why race matters in our state.
Part education, part celebration of the solutions, but also part call to action. Like just because you may not be personally affected, does that mean these issues don't exist and that you are removed from playing a role in bringing about the change that we all need to experience? Because it affects all of us at the end of the day. So ultimately race matters because of all of those things. It shouldn't, but because we recognize it does, now what are we doing about it? Okay, well, you all heard a little bit about my story, so I want to turn the floor over to Dr. Pate and Ms. Jackie about your Black in Wisconsin story.
Well, my Black moving to Wisconsin story starts in 1990. I've been here about 30-something years now. I'm originally from Chicago, south side of Chicago. I don't even know if I get to say I'm from Chicago anymore because I have lived more life here in Madison than I have in Chicago, but the truth of the matter is I'm always from Chicago. So Chicago, born, bred, and raised. I came to Wisconsin to escape the life that I was living there in Chicago. I'll disclose this just so for contextual purposes. I have a 30-year recovery story where I left Chicago because I was either gonna die or go to jail. And I wanted more for my life. And I came to Wisconsin with the plan of living here and going to school for 5 years and then moving on with my family to Atlanta. I had 2 children and was pregnant with my 3rd child, and I was a single mom at the time. So yeah, those 5 years have turned into almost 35 years, but Wisconsin is the place where I was able to find recovery, redemption, and restoration. And now I'm a single mom still, of 7 amazing young human beings and a grandma to 6. Since coming to Wisconsin, I have also gone back to school, received my associate's degree from Madison College and a bachelor's degree from Upper Iowa and a master's in counseling from Lakeland College. I've been here working. Thank you. Thank you. I do have one Badger daughter who graduated from the UW, but I think as the conversation goes on, I can share more about my life and who I am, and maybe even get a chance to interject some of what my children or young adults are doing in their lives. So I'll pass it to David now.
Thank you, Jackie.
Wait, one last thing I want to say is sorry that I am a member of Fountain of Life Covenant Church, and Reverend Dr. Alexander G. is my pastor, and he has been one of the most amazing mentors and leaders that you could ever come upon in any arena, just in every arena. He's just an amazing source. So there are a lot of people I could name, but I'm only gonna name one, and that's him. Now, David, I'm sorry.
You're done. You're all good. Okay. Good afternoon again. So I came to Wisconsin via born and raised in Philadelphia, very similar to your experience. Never saw a white person until I went to high school. Wow. And then at the high school, there was 500 people, and there was a lot of white people. So that was my first experience. And then I went to school in Detroit, then I went to school in Chicago, and lived in Chicago for 15 years and decided I wanted to, after 15 years of working as a social worker, wanted to get a PhD. And I came to, my wife went to school here as well and got her law degree from here. And we decided to raise our children around her mother and her sisters who were here. And so at that point, we came here in 1995. And I have to admit, I always went to very, very small schools for my undergraduate and my master's degree. So it was somewhat surprising when I went on campus that first day as a doctoral student, and I was met with a sea of white people. Like I had not, and I was an older person who, of course, had worked in the world and been around a lot of people who were of a variety of diverse races and ethnicities, but I still felt very out of place and felt very lonely because one, there's not very many black doctoral students on campus, and also I was an older student who had children and was married, so all those different identities made me somewhat stand out differently. And I couldn't relate to some of the things I heard from my cohort that they were whining about, in my opinion, when I had babies I was changing diapers with and trying to figure out how they were going to eat and go to school. But I think the thing about being a Wisconsinite, now have been here almost 30 years, is that for me, I've never felt fully a part of the system or part of this community. One, because it's very clear there's not very many black folk who have a PhD and a JD in the same family. And that's what I study. Why is there, in a place like this, so few people of color where academia is a really major force within this community, that you don't have more representation of that population? And that's what I study, is really why is this occurring? How is this occurring? What's the historical reason for this occurring? And so I'm someone who looks at structural issues and not behavior, which I tend to find a lot of people study more and not looking at what got us from point A to point B, when I have been taught in all schools I went to that race is a social construction. So it made me really think about my presence. And one thing I say to my students is that every day I wake up, I look in the mirror and I'm reminded that I'm black. And I had to figure out how am I going to negotiate this community being black and male, and who studies very poor black fathers and men and their families. So we can have more of an interjection that during the rest of the conversation, but that's a reality, and that's why I was really not anxious, but excited to be a part of this program, because race matters, because we make it matter for a variety of privileged and powerful reasons.
Yep.
And I think that's why we should have this conversation. So I've enjoyed this. I know that wasn't part of this conversation. You want to know about me, and I'm just talking. But anyway, that's who I am, and that's why I'm here. Was wanting to get my doctorate. I've taught at UW Milwaukee for the last 18 years, and I'm newly been recruited to be in Madison now. And I really miss Milwaukee because I have to admit, when I would drive, and I drove from Madison to Milwaukee for 18 years. I never moved. But one thing about when I would go to Milwaukee, I always felt more relaxed. Every time I would get into the city and I would do my research or sit at a coffee shop, I just felt something very different about my being and my recognition as a person in Milwaukee versus Madison. But I'll stop there.
Well, thank you all both for sharing. Like, I can definitely relate to points that you all both made. I was laughing in my head, Ms. Jackie, when you said you had a 2-year or 5-year plan when you
Yes,
first moved here.
yes.
Because I also had a 2-year plan when I first moved here that I'm like, 2016, I'm out of here. I'm going to somewhere on the West Coast. Nope, still here 10 years
Yeah,
later.
yep.
And then when you're describing your experience, even in academia, like reflecting on what that felt like for me as well, during my time on campus as a graduate student, but also like socially, what you had to navigate. And then that point you made about safety at the end, because I think safety is thought about differently based on your racial identity. Like, there's ideas of physical safety, but then psychological safety. Because I know Milwaukee, I didn't really have much of a concept of Wisconsin before I moved here, but when I came here, I was told basically Milwaukee is like the worst place to go to, and was discouraged from spending time there. But when I had, that felt like my outlet, like the closest space that felt like what home felt like to me, where I could see people that looked like me. So it was confusing that I was being told opposite messaging of what I personally felt. But I just wanted to open the floor back up if there were any other points you all wanted to make about what the experience felt like for you. I know you were elaborating on that, David, but Ms. Jackie, I don't know if you want to share more about what it felt like for you and your family being here in this setting after you had a different cultural orientation around what home felt like, and now establishing that new feeling of home in this space.
Well, definitely there was a different feel, so Chicago is like about a 2.5-hour drive. And so even though I lived here in Madison, where it was very white, and oftentimes my children were the only students of color or black students in their class, I was one of the few black parents who actually showed up for my children at school and in school. It was so unnatural. It was natural for me to be in those spaces, but what wasn't natural was for me not to see other parents in those spaces as well. I just thought that's what all black parents did, period. Actually, I thought that was just what all parents did, because where I grew up, there was all black parents. I did have a white principal as a kid, and then when I went to high school, I experienced a little more whiteness in Chicago, but for the most part, living on the south side of Chicago, I had an all-black experience, and coming to Madison was quite the shock of culture, and it was a positive shock for me, I'm gonna say that, because again, I was escaping. I was escaping a reality that was very dark, and Wisconsin was refreshing. It was welcoming of moms with children, and there were all these social service programs that, you know, were there to help us and things like that. So when I came to Madison, it was like a breath of fresh air for me, because it provided those outlets and those resources that my family needed at the time. I've been here now for over 30 plus years, and damn, did I just tell my age? Anyway, because I swear I'm 29. But,
The math isn't mathing, I'm sorry.
Over the course of the years and in the work that that I call my ministry as well, my goal was to support people who were experiencing some of the same challenges in their lives as that I had experienced. And I'll say this, while substance abuse was the response it was not the problem. And once I came to understand that it's become my life's mission to help others understand the relationship between substance use and real life and trauma. So I started doing all these things in the community, creating social events just so I could have people who look like me present. And that was the goal. I wanted my children to have relationships and have experiences with people who looked like them. We had some of that in my church, but I knew that if that was a lack for myself and for my family, that it was a lack for others as well. So I just started creating things in our community so that people who looked like us could have a place where they could really feel like they were in community. Did that answer the question?
No, really, I just wanted you to share what it felt like, and you did. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and on my educational journey, I realized that I didn't really want to be educated like the way that education is today. I wanted, and throughout my programming and throughout my degree programs, I heard and I did my coursework, and my whole purpose and goal was to translate everything that I was hearing and learning in academia language to how it would translate to me going back into my community providing services. And I had professors and instructors who would say, well, Jackie, you have to talk and you have to write in academia language. I said, that's difficult for me because my brain doesn't work like that. They said, well, you're gonna have to learn to be bilingual. And I suggested, no, perhaps you need to become bilingual so you can understand, because if I go back to my community and talk like academia language, they're not gonna receive me, and they're the ones who need my support the most. So it was challenging, and it continues to be, but I have committed myself to being a servant here and serving communities and individuals who fall through our cracks through the systems that we have set up, and primarily simply because of their race. You don't understand. People don't see, they can't relate to, for a number of reasons, they fall through the cracks. And this is still a place with a lot of resources. So we just have to work together to figure things out. I'll stop there.
No, you just dropped a few major gems, and I just want to recap just what I heard you say. And towards the end, it sounded like you were calling attention to academia, the academic world, and a lot of times there's work being done that is specifically focuses on communities that aren't necessarily represented, but then you question who is that work intended to be for if how it is provided is not accessible to those communities, right? And on top of that, you mentioned the hidden labor costs of being a member of an underrepresented group in this space where you can't just show up somewhere and things that you might enjoy, spaces your kids might be able to benefit from are there. If you want it, you have to create it, and that's work. That's tiring, and I've seen, unfortunately, people getting burnt out doing that. There were amazing people that I met when I first moved here as a single young adult who were creating awesome events and opportunities. They got tired of that, moved to Atlanta, got tired of that, moved to Houston. They moved to places where they didn't have to put in the work to just kind of live life. So I appreciate you calling attention to that. I don't know if there's anything more you wanted to add before we go to our next clip.
I added already, and I should have waited for your question.
Oh, no.
But I think what both of you have said is really, based on the most recent election, I'm going to go there right now.
We're there.
I think that we have to figure out what are you as a citizen of this state going to do moving forward? What are you as a teacher, a policeman, grocery worker, car repair shop? How are we going to think about race? Race is a social construction that brings with it power and privilege. And what does that mean for some of the language or discussions we've heard about particular groups of people in this country. And I think programs like this are important, but whether programs like this will exist in the future is questionable, because it does make people uncomfortable. And that's the reality. But I think for everyone in this room, that's the bigger question for me. What are you going to do, and how are you going to challenge or not challenge some of the issues that are going to arise around the discussions around race and gender and class?
Well, that's a great question that I'm glad you put out there to everyone else, because maybe we'll get some responses back when we have our Q&A opportunity. If there's nothing else for this topic, I'll pivot a bit, because I did want to show a clip from our episode on COVID-19 in education featuring UW-Madison's own Dr. Kevin Lawrence Henry. In it, he shares how he manages emotions and mental health while existing and working towards equity and racial justice. And after the clip, I would love for us to share how we personally navigate the space of finding peace and joy despite the challenges we personally and professionally face while doing the work that we do. So next clip, please.
I want to go back to something you said in the very beginning when you introduced yourself. You said that a driving force behind how you got into this work was anger and frustration. How do you manage that, given that you're involved in work where you may not see large-scale change in your lifetime?
Well, I often tell my students, my hope comes from things eternal, right? And I say that to say part of what this is a project of transcendence, which is to say that I can't be mired in the here and now, in the sense that the statistics have been there for actually centuries.
Yes.
Right? The data is quite clear in terms of how pronounced our racial disparities are. But the thing that I remember most is that even in the midst of that, even in the midst of, for instance, chattel enslavement, when Black people were in the hull of slave ships, we found community, we found love, we found hope, we found each other. And so for me, that is where I find my desire to continue. It is about being connected and in community with and in loving on each other. That is how I see it. And even if these things can be exceedingly frustrating, I believe it was Toni Morrison who said, I want to feel what I feel, even if it is not happiness. And so, yes, the data is one thing, but in all my years of being a researcher, I've come to realize that people are so much more than data, so much more than the data points that we find, so much more than the articles that we write and the books that we write. It is about the people. And so that is what keeps me going, faith and faith in people. It always has been and probably always will be.
So, after hearing that from Dr. Henry, what are you all's thoughts, reactions, or how personally do you navigate what hope, joy, peace in light of circumstances happening in the world around us, your professional lanes, and your personal life? How do you prioritize and keep that central for yourself?
Do you want to go first, Jackie?
First, I have my faith. It is unwavering and it's unshakable. And my faith is in God. I'm a Christian, I believe that. And everything I do, I bring my whole self to it. So you can't just have the academic Jackie or the community work Jackie or the counselor or therapist Jackie, because I'm one individual emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually. So I bring my whole self to the table, and my faith, again, just like,
Kevin,
is in people. I believe that despite the systems that will try to divide us or separate us or define us, that every individual deserves. And that's how I approach my work. Every individual deserves. I keep my own peace because I understand that I'm not the savior. In the work that I do, I'm just a source or a resource for people. I try my best to take good care of myself, the way I eat, the things that I do. I find joy in my children and my grandchildren. The community that I created for myself here, I extend it to anyone who wants to be a part of it. It's not an exclusive community, it's more inclusive, and everyone is welcome in the space. But if you choose to come in the space, you will have to understand that the space is guided and it is fueled by me or blackness, a black woman. And so all of that comes out in everything that I do. I try to be fair and just with things that I do and how I serve in this community. And I practice really good self-care. I will retreat, I will cry, I will command my own personal space. I refer to myself as the most extroverted introvert you will ever meet because I am so good with loving me and being with me. I don't need an entourage all the time around me. If I have that, I'm able to be okay, but my peace and my joy is found with those that are closest to me, which are my children and my grandchildren. I try to model good self-care in the spaces that I'm in. I watch some of our younger leaders that are coming up. I often send a message to them privately when I see them diverting on, on social media, or if I haven't heard from them in a while, I'll check in just to make sure they're okay. Yeah, I just believe that I have to be good in order to do good. And so I keep that as my little mantra or whatever, and believing that there's a source that's bigger than me here. And at the end of the day, all things are gonna work out. We are a very resilient people, but I don't like to rely on being resilient. I would like to see more human kindness and inclusiveness in our society and in our community today. So if you're in my space, that's what I'm about. That's where I hope that this will lead or continue to lead. And I'm grateful and thankful for the seeds that I've planted, because I may not see it in my lifetime, and that's fine. I share with my 10-year-old granddaughter that the hope I have for her life. Now I have an 8-month-old grandson, and I pray that over his life.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Jackie. Any thoughts, David?
Yeah, I thank you for what you said, and particularly the word resilience. And the one thing I've said to my students, but also I think about often, is people often think of black folk as always being depressed and sad, but we have a lot of joy.
Yes.
Black people have a lot of joy because they've had to figure out ways to get through lots of rough times. But lots of people of color or people who have been marginalized have found ways to sustain themselves in ways that are sustaining of their joy. And I mean, for myself, I have to often code switch of who, based on the job that I've chosen and how I have to be able to navigate those spaces in ways that my colleagues will see me as reputable. Because sometimes if I wasn't doing some of that, it would minimize my ability to move forward or to be recognized for the scholarship that I do offer. But I'm very strong in that, in my opinion, around how structure is the issue, not the behavior. Because people will behave in a way that they would like them to if they were given the resources that they need and the assets that they deserve. So I'm often someone who for me daily, I take at least a 40, 50-minute walk or some type of exercise to maintain my own well-being. But I'm also very blessed to have a wonderful family, a wonderful wife who drives me crazy, but she at the same time, she keeps me correct. And also helps me, reminds me of what's important in this world. I have two beautiful children who remind me of that on a regular basis, and wonderful nieces and nephews who remind me of that as well. So I definitely find myself more involved in my family and not as much as someone who's very social. But I do have friends, but I'm not the most social person because I just find I like being alone. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, I went to the Stevie Wonder concert by myself because I wanted to go. And that's something I don't hold back anything that's going to make me happy. And that's something that people know about. I just go. And I think that's something I wish more people had the advantage of, being an opportunity. But often we don't see the joy that we all can bring for our own well-being. But for me, it gets complicated because of the position I have. But when you were talking, Ms. Jackie, I thought about how in my classroom sometime students are very afraid to say the word black to me. And I don't use the word African American for a variety of reasons. And we can have that discussion if you want, but I tend to use the word black. And I remember every class I've had, students have always come to me after class saying, is it okay to say that word? And I think this whole idea of, in the ways that I maintain my sanity, is not to be afraid to confront what people are afraid of.
Right.
Because people have these various stereotypes about black men, about black women, about Latino men. I mean, they have these various stereotypes about people by their sexuality. And I've always been someone, as a teacher and as someone, if you're willing to have a conversation, I'm happy to have it with you. You may not like what you hear, but I'm happy to have that conversation with you. So for that reason, I try to protect myself because sometimes I'm not ready to have the conversation because it could be uncomfortable. But I just have to be very cognizant of how, because I'm willing to have a conversation about structure and how, when you look at black people who were enslaved for over 400 plus years, and those who came in this country who identify as white have had the privilege to develop their humanity for over 500 years, where another group only has had that for 120 years. But you expect me to be the same. I think about that all the time, and it's unfair. It's unfair for a lot of people. So for me, it's just always critically thinking the how, the why, the what am I going to do to make this world a better place.
Wow. Thank you both for sharing that and for the realization that this is a panel full of introverts sitting up here, which is kind of funny to me, but I appreciate that we're all stepping outside of our comfort zones to share our experiences with you all. Is there anything final you all want to share related to that topic? Otherwise, I absolutely relate to the community theme that you all have provided. I don't think I could have remained in Madison without building community, having those outlets, those spaces where I can feel seen and safe and not have to wear the hat of producer, host, or associate dean, or any of the professional hats that I wear, but also what does that look like to create that for other people when I'm in community with them, or in past spaces when I was in a teaching role, feeling like, how am I creating that for students who felt safe enough to come up to me to say at the college level, this was their first time ever having a black teacher and what that meant for them. So taking that personal responsibility of giving people what I feel like they need, but also, like you all are saying, taking the time for self to make sure that I have what I need to be okay.
So one thing that you said, David, the code switching is very exhausting. And I think for myself that as a single mom and having all the other labels that came along with it was so exhausting for me that subconsciously I created those spaces where I didn't need to code switch, where I could be authentically who I am in the space. And when I'm forced, kind of like I initially felt coming here today, I'm often reminded to just stay true to who I am. And I might not be everybody's cup of tea. Everyone won't have a palate for Jackie or Auntie Jackie or Miss Jackie. Everybody won't have a palate to understand and to savor my flavor. But
Put that on a
that
shirt,
doesn't-
please.
Pardon
Continue.
me?
Not saying put that on a shirt. Not everyone can savor my flavor. I buy it. Continue.
But that does not mean that I still shouldn't bring it.
Right.
See, because if it's uncomfortable, if it's uncomfortable for you to savor my flavor, perhaps you might need to explore why. You know, and I think this being a diversity forum, that's something that we all can take a look at. You know, when we find ourselves in spaces where we may feel like we have to, like you said, David, I understand you're a professor, code switch for credibility. And I think that because I'm old now, I don't really care.
Oh, touche to that.
That's it.
I think one other thing before we continue is this whole issue of colorblindness has done a disservice, and that's why this show is important, because people have lived experiences that are different based on a variety of identities that people have been assigned. And I thought that the good thing about this show and why I agreed to be on the advisory board was an opportunity for those who were willing to really listen and really do some personal interrogation of how have I contributed or not contributed to what people are talking about in these shows that have been aired is important. Because I think we often don't reflect on what we do, me and myself included. I'm in a position of power as a professor, as a man, as a black person. For some, you know, there's identities that I have that bring certain privileges for me to navigate this world. But I do think that the whole idea of colorblindness and teaching children about we're all the same. Yeah, we all have hands and feet and eyes, but based on skin color, everybody, whether they want to admit it or not, thinks of somebody in a certain way. I would challenge anybody in this room to say they don't. Because that's the reality of how this country's soil and creation began.
Right.
Based on people coming over on ships who were in the bottom of those ships and told that based on their identity, they were less than and had no power or privilege in this country. Right. And that's why I thought this type of program will at least start a conversation over the dinner table, at Thanksgiving time, maybe at Christmas. Well, Christmas might not be the time, but you want to get your gifts. But I was hoping it would cause a conversation. And I have found myself be able to use some of these shows in my classes for people to have a conversation. So that's how I want to applaud PBS for even stepping out and doing something like this.
Yes, awesome. Thank you for that, David and Ms. Jackie.
You're very welcome.
All right, that was a great transition point to our last clip that I wanted to share and talk about before we open it up for questions. This last clip is about civic engagement and representation and features the youngest person that I've had the privilege of interviewing thus far, Tatiana Benson. She shares what success, if possible, looks like for her as she works towards racial justice and equity in Wisconsin. And given that this forum's theme is navigating difference and building community, I'm curious to hear about what success, if possible, looks like to you all around that topic.
You're born and raised here, and you're still here.
Yeah.
So you maybe recognize, like, okay, I'm here for a reason. There's some work that needs to be done. So just tell us more about that.
So I think personally for me, I'm still in Madison because I think that it needs a lot of help. So I think that if you have the space and the will to help something, help it. A lot of times the Midwest gets a rep of like a liberal utopia. And so I always tell people that Wisconsin is like cold Mississippi. You know, there's some things that you love about it, but it has some real issues that need to be like fixed.
I think like the South, when you think about the South, you think about segregation, you think about organizations like the KKK, you think about like really overt, in your face, like racism. Yeah. And here, I don't think we get that sort of recognition. Well, like you said, we're seen as, especially like Madison, we're seen as liberal. Like those things don't happen here. And you're saying like, it does, just in a colder temperature. So I guess what would be the ideal for you as someone who, again, born and raised here, committed to doing work here to create a state that you want to see, that you want other people to experience? Like, what would that ideal look like in a perfect world?
You know, this is actually a question I'm asked a lot, and I always feel slightly bad for my answer because it's like not the one that people are looking for.
Okay.
Maybe it's because I look at things too deep sometimes, but, you know, I couldn't tell you what that looks like. I don't know what justice looks like. I don't know if Black people know what justice looks like in general. Have we ever really gotten it? So I couldn't tell you what a just world looks like or feels like. I just know that this isn't it. So I can't tell you what a good Wisconsin looks like. I just know that what we have right now, doesn't feel like it's right. So it just needs to be better.
Amen.
Wow. Come out of the mouth of babes.
So how are you all feeling, especially in our current climate?
Well, the work that I do as a researcher is I study Black men and their life course events, particularly Black men who make less than $10,000 a year. Most of the men I've studied make zero, to be honest, which people find hard to believe that you can be in a world where you make $0. Thank God for Black women who help these men navigate this world. And for the women, they have partners who help them navigate this world as well, period. Or the partners of those men I've interviewed who have gay partners or men who are their lovers. Because what I've found being in Wisconsin and studying Black men, but also nationally studying Black men, they're very invisible. Unless you want to see them as someone who is going to cause you harm. And the one thing I do that I think, I don't know if I would call, maybe it's not revolutionary, but I have maintained since I was an undergrad that I would only work with Black men. And that's all I did as a social worker, and that's all I've done as a researcher, except more recently I've done some work with women who are receiving TANF benefits in Pennsylvania. I've tried to humanize and give some level of humanity to what it means to be Black and male and poor in this country, and to be living under certain policies that don't take into consideration a race analysis. Because if you look at what we've collected data on over the years, we've shown it shows very clearly that Black families have always been the most impoverished population of all populations. And it's not because they're stupid, it's not because they don't work hard, it's not because they're less than, it's because they haven't been given the same access and opportunity. That's the argument I give, and I look at policies and procedures, and I could, if you want to take my class next semester, I'll share it with you, what I teach my students. It's clear to see how government, federal, state policies were put in place that benefited one group over the other. And that there was a reason for that. And we need to have a discussion on why there was a reason for that. And that goes back to what responsibility we all have in this room to understand why does race matter. So clearly, when someone tells me I should have, like right now, I'm doing my Black job. When somebody says you should have there's a Black job, why do you use the word Black in front of the job? Like, what is that about? You know, that reminds me of something about that term elicits certain types of feelings that you want people to have. Mm-hmm. And so my work is all structural. I don't look at behavior, like I said earlier, and I look at how a certain policy affects a person's behavior. Mm-hmm. Right now I've been studying people coming out of prison who have been in prison for 20 years or more. And to understand the Department of Corrections policies, well, that story will be told in another year when I write my papers. It's very telling. When you're in a state where we have one of the worst incarceration rates of black men, but they're only 6% of the state, but they're 50% of the prison system, either they have some kind of special gene that makes them criminal, or something else is going on. That's the way I was thinking, like, why? I started thinking the why, and I wish more people would start questioning the why, not the why because of the behavior, but the why because of the structure. What is behind that? And so that's what I've tried to do in terms of my own sanity and safety, as well as contribution, and trying to keep it real. Because I also bring the privilege for so many of the men I've talked to, they don't see very many men with a PhD who's black. And I feel that as long as I can walk and talk and do the things I need to do, and maybe even if I'm on a cane, I would want people to see the representation of themselves. And I encourage so many of those men that I've talked to understand their worth of who they are as a father, as a husband, as a lover, as an entrepreneur, as a worker, as a son, as a nephew, whatever it may be, however they define themselves. But I think this issue of identities is something that's really important in my work, but also in just this discussion, but also in how I keep my own sanity. I don't allow it to just let it go. I figure out ways to do it through my work with a show like this, because this is my scholarship. I'm contributing in that way. And also it allows me to hopefully get more people to understand what I see as an issue around structure.
Yes.
So.
No, I appreciate that, because it sounds like building community and navigating difference starts with interrogating policies and the systems and structures that contribute to why we're not already in community in the ways that people feel like it's beneficial. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
How about you?
So I guess thinking about being a black woman, which I am, this whole country was built on black women's backs. We are the foundation that holds the family together, systems together, and this idea of working with marginalized women of color or black women, these aren't women, they are marginalized because the systems perpetuate that marginalization. I, as a black woman, work, I support my family, I pay taxes, I'm a homeowner, and so many other black women are the same, but the systems won't allow them to excel or have access to better their lives as they do the dominant group in our society. So this race matters, black women's matter, I matter. And my whole being is to be a hope to help others realize that they have the potential within themselves to create the life that they want for themselves and for their families, not for them to constantly see themselves as marginalized. I want us to begin to empower black women, empower black men and families so that they can see themselves in positions and in society as contributing members, like as a Kamala Harris or as a Lamar Jackson or LeBron James or whoever, right? We have to begin to, we just have to do better. Like Tatiana said, this is not what we want. We just have to do better. And everyone has a role to play in your little corners of the world, at your dinner tables, at the Thanksgiving table, with your family members. Have the conversations. Start bringing this up and understand and help people understand the importance of why race matters and why being black in Wisconsin is a job.
So being black in Wisconsin is one of your black jobs, is what you're saying?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Anyway, that's it.
Well, I definitely appreciate both of you and your time and commitment over the past 4 years. This has been a labor of love doing this work around Why Race Matters. It legit started with an email that I sent out to some of the production team that's here today around the time when it was on brand for brands to come out with their racial equity statements. And I was like, what's PBS Wisconsin about? Can we do something about this? We were on break at the time with filming because of COVID, and they were like, absolutely. Let's go on the rooftop of the Madison Museum of Contemporary Arts. Let's film safely and start the conversation. And it's been going ever since. So it's been a beautiful experience. It has brought its challenges, especially as things nationally and within our state legislation has impacted people's safety around having these conversations. And we've never wanted to create an unsafe space, especially for our communities that we know already feel a sense of unsafety. So we've had to navigate that while also acknowledging that me being the one that interviews them does matter. They've said that. It feels different when I'm having a conversation with you than maybe others that I might be more accustomed to having conversations with within Wisconsin. So again, appreciate you all, appreciate all of you who spent time today with us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank
We
you.
recognize there may be a lot of feelings coming out of last week. I know I may not be the only one that was looking at the trends, the exit polls, and deciding where I might need to be long term, right? So all of that, I think, combines to why we're here, why we're committed. And again, want to thank you all and open up the floor for any questions you have of us.
Good job.
Thank you, thank you.
So is there any questions?
There are two
Comments?
microphones located on either side of the room while people make their way. I have one question from online forum that I'll answer to the stage. There seems to be an increasing recognition of the history and legacy of the Great Migration today. In what ways does that movement of African Americans show itself in Wisconsin?
Okay, say that one more time.
Sure. There seems to be an increasing recognition of the history and legacy of the Great Migration today. In what ways does that movement of African Americans show itself in Wisconsin?
Well, I'll just chime in briefly to say that is an episode we're working on for the upcoming season, actually having an expert
So folks
who can
online.
talk about that. But I didn't know if before that airs, if either one of you have anything that you'd like to share. Other than that, we know that the Great Migration brought a lot of Black people to Chicago, and of course, Chicago, Wisconsin being right there beside each other, there's that indirect contribution. But yes, in terms of the Wisconsin direct linkage, I didn't know if you all knew.
I haven't really studied that, so I don't really know if I could respond to it. One thing you said earlier, Jackie, which I forgot to mention, when I first moved to Chicago, and we moved to Wisconsin, the newspaper would always put in there, when they didn't want to say Black, former Chicagoan. And I kept thinking, well, I'm a former Chicagoan. What are they trying to, any former Chicago, who are they talking about? And it wasn't until a year or so after I kept seeing the reporters always say former Chicagoan, that was the code word for being Black. And so I think that, many people who have moved here because, hey, Madison is a beautiful space. I love the lakes. I love the 12 minutes to wherever I need to go. I love to be able to get to my doctor. That part, the ease of it, I really enjoy. So the migration from Chicago to here, to me, was I was amazed that I said, people live like this? This is amazing. And they're keeping this under wraps. They don't want people to move here. And when my friends would visit here, they would say that. But I think that the Great Migration was a wonderful opportunity for so many people to get to a space where they felt they could do better for their family. But again, the structures that were put into place also made it more difficult for people who were moving to those spaces, depending on their identity, harder to really settle in. And it takes a lot of perseverance, family, community, whatever it might be, to get you to that space where you're comfortable. And often if you don't have that, unfortunately, things could fall apart. But I haven't studied it in the way that question is presented, but I do think there's something to be said about the Great Migration, but it'll be interesting to see what the next couple of years are going to present around what does it mean to migrate and to be settled and comfortable in a space based on your identity.
Yes, thank you for that.
So.
I think no.
I'm not touching it.
Okay. More questions? Oh, yes.
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you to all three of you for your insights. And the question that I had is, so Ms. Jackie talked about how we all have our jobs to do in our own spaces, in our homes, et cetera. And while recognizing the emotional labor that can go into answering this question, since many of us here are staff and not part of like faculty, et cetera, what could you say staff can do to help support this mission more in our own spaces, both professionally, professionally?
Well, I think that even professionally, you have an obligation and an opportunity to have conversations and even to model what that equity would look like or how to make things more just in your spaces. I don't want to judge how the spaces look right now. I'm sure that if you stayed in this particular workshop, that obviously this is something that you care about and that you are hopefully engaged in already. So just continue to try to be the person or the voice or the space where you are able to have conversations and make it safe for people, especially for other people like me, to come in and engage.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, I do have a question, and thank you for all the work that you're doing. My question is, what are some things that you would like to plug for us, like PBS specials you're working on, things that are already out there for us to watch, papers that you have been working on or have worked on that you'd like us to read, things that we can go home and do ourselves?
Okay. Well, I appreciate that question because that was part of my assignment that I did not do. So whyracematters.org is where you can see all of the episodes that we filmed since 2020.
Yep.
In terms of reading, there's so much to read to me. There's a lot of material. I just finished reading the book, The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I would recommend you read it. Some people don't agree with what he's saying there, but it's all about race. It's all about the issues that we're currently dealing with in terms of the war that's going on overseas. There's a lot of things. Books by Maya Angelou, Toni Morrison. There's a lot of things out there to read. And so I'm happy to talk to you afterwards and you can send me an email and I can give you what I have my students read. At one point, when I was at UW Milwaukee in 2016, I think it was, I taught one of the first Black Lives Matters classes in the country. And so I still have that reading list. I'm happy to share that with you. I don't know if I'll teach it here based on where things are right now, but I would like to do something like that again. I thought it was really helpful to my students to be able to just have a very comfortable discussion about what does that mean? Why is there even a movement like that? And I'm happy to share that with you. It's for anyone who wants that, they can email me and I'm happy to share that reading list.
Well, I'm gonna make a shameless plug for a podcast. My pastor, Reverend Dr. Alex G, does a podcast called Black Like Me. Take a listen. I guess y'all know how to find podcasts. And if you want to delve into something a little bit more personable, I'll say you could read my book, Redeemed Through Recovery. And it is a book on restoration, resilience, and recovery. And those vignettes will give you some insight into some of the ways that systemic barriers can hold a person back, but if you persevere, you can come out. So, yeah. And my book is available on Amazon. Thank you.
Hey, Angela. It's Ryan. I'm going to plug a couple more PBS things real quick. So we have a great documentary called Wisconsin in Black and White that just recently won a National Mural Award. I would highly recommend checking that out. Also, Wisconsin Hometown Stories Beloit just aired recently, and in that program, it talks specifically about the Great Migration and what it meant to Beloit in Wisconsin. So those are a couple PBS Wisconsin programs you can check out.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks.
First of all, thank all of you so much for what you're bringing. And Miss Jackie, I can so relate to you because I have issues being a black woman and being my authentic self. There's been issues around that, but I've been feeling more emboldened. It's kind of like you say, as you get older, you're like, that's your issue, not mine. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
But what I want to say and ask you all, we know as black people here in the United States, we not only deal with systemic racism, resistance to deliver our whole and true history, microaggressions, discrimination, and as women's sexism. We also have to deal with those that come to our country that look like us, right? But they take on the same attitude as the dominant culture that we're in. So my question to you is, how do you process that? And what do you say to those individuals to help them understand that? Or is that our role?
I traveled to, I was invited to speak in Ghana this summer. At the conference in Ghana that I spoke at in Accra, Ghana, I talked about those exact issues. And one of the things that I heard repeatedly from the people in the audience after I finished talking about issues that, what does it mean to be black in America, but particularly what does it mean to be black and male in America, because the conference was focused on healthcare, and I talked about the social determinants of health as they pertain to black men and the research I've done. They all came to me collectively saying they never hear that story. And all they know is what the media has said about the role that black men play or who black men are, or what's been kind of perpetuated through people's communications about black families. And I think part of it is, people just want to have any opportunity to have these conversations like we're having today, but also willing to listen and open up their eyes to see that that's not the truth. I think some people just have a truth in their head and that they can't get beyond that. They can't get beyond what they've been told all their life about someone who is white or black or Latin A or male, female, trans, get queer. I think we get stuck in buying into certain prejudices about people or stereotypes. But I think for those, I only can speak on those who I've spoken to who are African. And the reason I don't use the word African American to identify myself is because I've had, again, privilege to talk to some people in Africa. I've been to Africa several times who have said to me that when you say you're African American, what country in Africa, because Africa is a continent, it's not one place. It's a continent of it's one of the richest places in terms of minerals and everything you can think of in the world stuff is being taken from it. And Julius Nyerere, who I had the privilege of having tea with one time, who was in Tanzania, he said to me, you should embrace being black because black was the term that was ascribed to you. Yep. And that's what you should, as a revolutionary, let people know you are because they told you were black. And so if it makes them uncomfortable, too bad. So for me, I just say I don't get offended if you say I'm African American because I know some part of me I don't know what part of me came from, but I know the part that you see is definitely an African identity. But I tend to use the word Black American for that reason, because you put that title on me, those who had the power to do that, and you did it because that gave you more privilege than I had based on my identity. But for me, I guess that's the bottom line is, for those who are African who had this idea of who black people are, I just think talking to people as much as you can, and unfortunately, it's a lot of work, and it just gets tiring. But I just think it's important to talk about it, about what it means to be black and how beautiful it is all the time. So I don't know if that's a full answer, but I'm happy to have a conversation with coffee. I'll buy the coffee if you want to do that. I'm happy to continue that conversation if you want to.
Well, and David, to add to that, I think that, like you're saying, white supremacy being at the root of how both groups have differently had negative experiences and even have viewed each other negatively, even though we have a common origin point. Like, just because we experienced the transatlantic slave trade, our African brothers and sisters experienced colonization. So how does that all merge together to inform how we're viewing each other? And then when we come someplace like here, where our numbers are so small, it's easy to lump everyone together and to not even recognize where there are differences. We're having this conversation currently. I have a role at Madison College where we're looking at black male student success. Who are we talking about? Are we talking about students from the continent of Africa? Or are we talking about black American males? Because their needs are going to be very different. And we can't just merge everyone together because they have a common skin tone. So how do we have the language to understand difference and then also not feed into any infighting that ultimately we didn't create?
Yeah. And also people who I talked to in Africa when I was there most recently, there's something that what's different is that everybody looks like you. Everybody looks like you, and except in certain parts of Africa, and particularly in Ghana. And there's a certain type of pride that you have, and also just you don't have to deal with some of the issues of racism. There may be ethnicities and tribal issues that will be problematic, but this race issue is very unique to America, and it's spreading throughout the world. That's something that we're really passing on other people, just to critically think about this. If you look at around the world where things are at, where it's really spreading, what's happening here is spreading, and I've traveled enough, because I used to do a study abroad in Austria, and you could see it happening there about 7, 8 years ago, where the issue of race was becoming very, very clear. But it's a country that has been more of those who identify as Austrian. They don't identify as white, they identify as Austrian, but they started being more white once the Sudan folks who were coming there trying to escape the issues they were having, who were in refugee camps. So I think this issue of race is something people have to get comfortable having discussion, but that's on you guys. You have to figure out how you're going to handle that.
Yep. I think we may have time for one more question, if there is one more question. Nope.
Thank you all for coming. Really appreciate this conversation. Since you're all transplants to Madison, if you were a young person coming to Madison, what would you do differently? And also, for young people that are coming specifically to this campus, what would you recommend for those black students to do to have a successful experience?
I can answer the first part of your question. The first part of your question would be to come for the reason you came and get out.
Well, that was a quick answer.
Yeah, seriously. No, Madison is a beautiful place, and I would suggest, I guess, to get involved. Find something that you're really interested in, a cause or a belief, a value that you really hold true to, and become a change in that area. We can't all take on everything, but we each have our own passions and ideals and things that hold the most value for us. So if you're gonna stay, just be prepared and find something that you can be true to and be authentically you and do the work.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
I think for someone coming to Madison as a student, and I don't know how that's going to be moving forward based on that identity being so more out front there. That's going to be, it might be or not, I don't know, problematic, I don't know for sure. But I don't have the absolute answer. I just know that, I reflect on my undergrad and grad experience, and there was a group of us that we all just helped each other out, and we were supported by the school to do that. the school gave us a fund, and they said, do what you need to do to be able to do well. This was in grad school. And in grad school was at the University of Chicago, which you would never think that they would do that. And they made a point of making sure that we had what we needed to be successful and graduate. In my undergrad school, we just, upon ourselves, had a table and a space, and we just did it because we did it. And sometimes you just need to leave them alone. Just let people do what they're going to do, but give them the resources to be able to make, at this point, because race is so divided and so volatile in so many ways, people just need resources, and you just leave them alone. Because you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you're saying. You can make it all bad. I'm not saying everyone's like that, but sometimes you just need to leave them alone. Just let them do what they need to do, but give them the resources to do what they need to do to be successful. But I don't know how that would work. I mean, I'm not in charge, but I think sometimes that's important to do, just to kind of figure out how people can have access to the resources to make them feel included and that it's equitable for everyone at the same time.
Absolutely, and I'll just add really quickly, I had the opportunity a few years ago to teach psychology, a psychology course for people program scholars. So it was their summer before they were going to matriculate to UW-Madison full-time. And we had a lot of conversation in that class because many of those students were not looking forward to becoming a student at UW-Madison because they were anticipating having a negative experience. And I couldn't blame them for having that line of thinking because their experience on campus that summer, we witnessed the microaggressions, we witnessed the overt racism. So the fact that they were just kind of biting the bullet and kind of taking it, but also taking it with a little bit of cringe, that was unfortunate. So we talked about what that looked like and ultimately how important community was to them. So just to echo what you all said, like students coming here, especially if they're not already from here, building and finding community on campus is essential, but also I think there's sometimes a disconnect between the campus Black community and Black Madison off campus. Right. And so if that divide can be bridged a bit, then it shows there are tons of people here who are willing to support students coming from wherever to ensure their success. And like Ms. Jackie said, if you need to get in, get it out, that's great. We support you in getting in and getting out, but having a great experience while you're here. So, Nancy? I think that might be our time. I don't know if someone else is coming up here, but thank you all so much. We appreciate you and hope you enjoy the rest of the forum.
Thank you. Yeah.